ਅਤੇ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣਾ ਘਰ ਮੰਨਦੇ ਨੇ, ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਇੱਥੇ ਵਸ ਜਾਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨਲਸ ਵੱਖੋ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੱਖੋ ਵੱਖਰੀਆਂ ਬੈਕਗਰਾਊਂਡਸ ਤੋਂ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ, ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੁਸ਼ਕਿਲ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਹੈ ਕ੍ਰੈਡੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਵੈਲਿਊਏਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ। ਕ੍ਰੈਡੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਵੈਲਿਊਏਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਪੈਸਾ ਵੀ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ, ਸਮਾਂ ਵੀ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ, ਅਤੇ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਕੁਝ ਖਾਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਸਟਰੀਮਲਾਈਨ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਉਹਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਮੁਸ਼ਕਿਲਾਂ ਵੱਧਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਅਤੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਦਾ ਸਾਰਾ ਲਾਂਭਾ ਉਹ ਫਿਰ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਅਤੇ ਸਿਸਟਮ 'ਤੇ ਸਿਰ ਜਾਂਦਾ। ਪਿਛਲੇ ਕੁਝ ਸਮੇਂ ਤੋਂ BC ਸਰਕਾਰ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਨੂੰ ਹੋਰ ਬਿਹਤਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਵੇ, ਅਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਟੂਡੀਓ 'ਚ ਪਹੁੰਚੇ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਮਹਿਕਮੇ ਦੇ ਮੰਤਰੀ, ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਸਤਿਕਾਰਯੋਗ ਐਂਡਰਿਊ ਮਰਸੀਅਰ ਹੋਣੀ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਆਫ ਸਟੇਟ ਨੇ ਵਰਕਫੋਰਸ ਡਿਵੈਲਪਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਪਿਛੋਕੜ ਬਾਰੇ ਮੈਂ ਸੰਖੇਪ 'ਚ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਾਂ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਲੈਂਗਲੀ ਤੋਂ MLA ਨੇ, 2020 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ MLA ਬਣੇ, ਅਤੇ ਮੈਰੀ ਪੋਲਕ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਮੰਤਰੀ ਸਨ ਔਰ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਇਸ ਖਿੱਤੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਅਸਰ ਰਸੂਖ ਸੀਗਾ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹਰਾ ਕੇ ਦੂਜੀ ਵਾਰ ਚੋਣ ਲੜੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਐਂਡਰਿਊ ਮਰਸੀਅਰ ਹੋਣਾ ਨੇ, ਔਰ ਲੈਂਗਲੀ ਤੋਂ। Probably this was the first time ever that NDP won in this riding. 2020 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ MLA ਬਣ ਕੇ ਵਿਕਟੋਰੀਆ ਪਹੁੰਚੇ ਐਂਡਰਿਊ ਮਰਸੀਅਰ ਹੋਣੀ। ਸਟੂਡੀਓ 'ਚ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਚੁੱਕੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਆਪਾਂ। ਔਰ ਕਿੱਤੇ ਵਜੋਂ ਵਕੀਲ ਨੇ ਉਹ, ਅਤੇ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਕਾਫੀ ਲੰਬਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਟ੍ਰੇਡਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ, ਬਤੌਰ ਲਾਇਰ ਵੀ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਹੈਲੋ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ, ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਜੀ, ਵੈਲਕਮ ਟੂ ਦ ਸਟੂਡੀਓ।
Thanks for having me.
Once again, welcome.
Well, it's it's a good day and it's an exciting day. I mean, we've got a lot to talk about, so I'm glad to be in.
So I'm here doing shows, broadcasting in this business for last almost 20 years now, and we always talk about credential evaluation and always talk about the problems that people face. And your ministry and you personally been doing some sort of thought process and pondering over this issue. What's new in this field and what BC government is planned to do?
Yeah, so over this past spring, we did a range of engagements, and I did a range of engagements with internationally trained professionals, regulatory bodies, and immigrant serving organizations on the question of international credential recognition and unnecessary barriers that are in folks' way. And we got the results of all of the engagement in a report today that we've released today that detail essentially what I heard across the board from folks doing the engagement, which is the system's broken. It's not working. It's not working for internationally trained professionals. It's not working for regulators. It's not working for British Columbia. And so it's clear that we need to make some pretty serious changes. We've started in healthcare and we've started with the health professions already, but I've heard stories across the board and everything from engineering to veterinary medicine about serious barriers in the way of internationally trained professionals. So we're going to bring a law forward this fall coming from this report to give government the power to standardize the process for internationally trained professionals. Because some of the barriers I heard about are just, I think unfair. And we talk about it a lot as an economic issue, about needing people for jobs, but it's also a question of basic fairness for people.
Can you give us some examples so people should understand this better?
Yeah, so if you're an internationally trained professional, you have to go through a process with the Professional Regulatory College. So whether that be engineering, whether that be architecture, nursing, we have 50 regulatory colleges or 50 regulators within British Columbia and over 200 professions. And the amount of barriers internationally trained applicants face are staggering. And I'll give you an example. I spoke with a gentleman from Hong Kong, speaks English better than I do, has a master's degree from the United Kingdom. He goes to apply to get his credentials recognized. It takes 24 months for him to even get an answer from the regulatory body, which is, not appropriate. We need to fix that. But he tells me, I had to take the English exam and prove that I speak English. I have a master's degree in English from Hong Kong, but I still have to, or from United Kingdom, sorry, but I still have to prove I speak English. Then that test times out. Every 12 months, he has to retake it.
12 months or 2 years?
Well, so for his particular profession, it was 12 months. And because
language is such a thing that it never expires.
Well, and that's what he said to me. And I heard this across the board, but I won't forget what he said to me, which was, I didn't forget how to speak English in 12 months. I live in Canada. I'm working in Canada.
You can go to India, you can go to whatever place, but you never forget English. Yes?
Yeah, and so the question is this really a necessary thing to do? So one of the recommendations from the report was, look, if you have an educational background from an English-speaking country or in English, do you need to even be tested on your English? And that's a requirement that we would look at waiving. But we need to make sure, because there are so many regulatory colleges of varying levels of independence, we need to make sure we have the tools to standardize it. Right?
How are we going to fix this? Any idea, rough idea?
Yeah, so, and I mean, I think we're going to bring in the strongest legislation in the country in terms of making sure that government has tools to tell regulators, look, here are timelines that you're accountable for. Here are processes that you need to be accountable for, and here are standards that you have to meet. Now, we need to support the regulators to do that because, you know, I met with all of the regulatory colleges, and some of them will say, I think rightfully, hey, look, you know, we don't have a lot of staff in the office. We're a small regulatory body. So we need to make sure there are supports there so that they can raise up and meet the standards. But I mean, some of them, like the example about English, I think are just common sense. Some of them are about resources. So we need to make sure that regulators are accountable for timelines. I'll give you an example. If you've come from India, from China, from somewhere else, and you have your bachelor's degree from there, and you have your training from there, the regulator has to assess, you know, make sure that you do have the degree you say you have and you took the courses you say you took. That is often farmed out. It's contracted out to a third party, and the regulator's not accountable for the timeline. So that can create a 2-year logjam in some cases where, you know, folks are sitting there working in other jobs thinking, should I even go through with this process? And so that's not the result we want. That's not the outcome we want. And it's very clear to me that there needs to be standards set that regulators have to follow. And to do that, we need to bring a law into place, making sure that it's clear that government has the power to do that, so that we can, you know, we can create those pathways.
And apart from this, you know, streamlining and shortening the timelines are very important. But apart from that, money that's spent on this process, is that an important factor as well?
Well, you know, I think, and I heard from a lot of folks, and the report covers this, that it can cost, depending on your profession, a tremendous amount of money. And even the example about the English test, it costs money every time you do that. And most internationally trained
$250 or something?
It varies, but it's not cheap. And internationally trained professionals, most of the ones that, you know, I've spoken to, are raising families, right? And every dollar counts. And so we've made sure we've started with healthcare, putting in supports to help internationally educated healthcare workers. But just in the past few weeks, we put together a $1.5 million fund for internationally trained professionals, and we included temporary residents in that, because there's a lot of folks, you know, that come here as temporary residents who are going to stay as permanent residents that have credentials. And we want people to start their journey as early as possible. So we put that $1.5 million there to help folks along the way is an immediate solution. But we're looking at supports across the board as we review this report.
So when do you think all that we have learned from in this process, and based on the feedback that we got from almost 1,500 people, when do you think the government is about to take action, and what kind of action there'll be?
Yeah, so we are drafting legislation right now, and we are looking at this report as we draft legislation to make sure that we address the very real barriers people face. And that's going to come into play in the fall. When the legislature's back in session in the fall, we're going to bring a law forward to get moving on this as quickly as possible. In the past, it was ignored. And we've, like I said, started the work with the healthcare professions, but we need to expand this to all professions. I have met too many engineers who are driving for DoorDash. And, you know, when we want to build infrastructure, we want to build housing, and we need professionals for the built environment, like engineers, like architects. We need to make sure that they have clear pathways and the support they need to get there. So this can't come soon enough. We're going to bring it forward at the earliest opportunity, which is this fall in October.
And Minister, lastly, what was the reason that this process, we found out that, what was the basic reason why this delay happened? And was it something to do with those regulatory bodies, or what was wrong, and where was it wrong?
Yeah, you know, I think what it is it's a process that has come to be without any standardization. Every regulatory body is in charge of their own international credential assessment. So you have many hands trying to do the same thing with varying levels of support. And frankly, and this is one of the things we found in the engagement, there are regulators that don't keep any data as to how many internationally trained professionals apply every year. So they couldn't even tell you what their success rate is with internationally trained professionals because they don't look at it. And so, we need to make sure, irrespective of what caused the problem, that we're fixing it. And that's what the next steps we're going to take this fall.
Especially your government, Mr. Health Minister, Mr. Adrian Dix, he did so many things in the health professions, which probably the basic purpose is to make it more, better for the patients, all that. And if we have already professionals here trying to get the credentials right, I think it's the right time and about time to do the right thing. Anything in the closing? We have a minute and a half left now.
And what I would say on that is, coming out of the engagement, every regulatory body I spoke to agreed that the system isn't working. Nobody said, "Hey, we're meeting the need that we need to meet here." And so I think we're really in a moment right now, provincially, where there is a lot of room to move on this, and we're going to be bringing forward, some legislation to make some pretty serious adjustments to how things work in the process. But at the end of the day, it's about fairness. It's about, we talk about it as an economic issue and as an issue about workforce, but it's about fairness for people, which is, if you have the credentials and the skills and everything else, you ought to be able to work in your chosen profession.
And this is not only about the immigrants. Other day when I was going through a story at the federal level, a doctor who was working in Australia, and his mom had a clinic in Ontario somewhere, and she was trying to come in because her mom was about to retire, and she had to wait for 14 months to come here and get all the credentials approved.
Yeah, for sure. And there's tons of lawyers as well that go to the UK and do their law degree, or go to Australia and come back.
And their English is the same English.
Yep. And it's the same. And so they're here, but the level of barriers in the way is, we've reached a point where it's, absurd, and we need to address that, and we're going to address that.
So we almost done. Anything? We have 40 seconds left now. Anything from
Well, I'd just like to say to all of your listeners, and anyone listening with an international credential, we hear you. I heard you during the engagement, and we're going to take some pretty significant action on this, because the way things stand right now, it's not right, and so we're going to address that.
Mr. Thank you very much for being in the studio and giving us so much knowledge on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
ਸੋ ਇਹ ਸਨ ਜੀ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਐਂਡਰੂ ਮਰਸੀਏ ਹੁਣੀ, ਤੇ BC ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੇ 1450 ਵਿਅਕਤੀਆਂ ਦਾ ਫੀਡਬੈਕ ਹਾਸਲ ਕਰਕੇ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਇਸ ਖੇਤਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਚਿਰੋਕੀ ਮੰਗ ਆ ਆਪਣੀ, ਬਹੁਤ ਚਿਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਸ ਮਾਮਲੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਮਾਮਲਾ ਹੱਲ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਖੇਤਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਫੌਰੀ ਕੁਝ ਮਹੱਤਵਪੂਰਨ ਕਦਮ ਚੁੱਕਣੇ ਨੇ, ਅਤੇ ਉਮੀਦ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਜਿਸ